Welcome all of you, and thank you also for being able to attend today. So welcome to the Capture the Flag introduction. So you want to CTF. That's basically the theme for today's training session. And our focus is going to be basically on the following, but perhaps since we're such a large group, there's just a few housekeeping rules that I just want to ask. If you can, please remain muted for the duration of this training session. It is a bit disturbing, random mics going on and off. I think we've all been in this virtual environment for a long time. So if you can, please remain muted. Should you have a question, perhaps as we go along through the training, please type your question in the message box. I will try to address it during the Q&A session that we plan to have at the end. Also, during that session, I will allow you guys to raise hands, ask questions. Then it's basically an open session to discuss. Just for me, just to make it a bit easier for me, just to sort of coordinate this session, please perhaps refrain from unmuting and asking questions during the specific training session. It is a long session. It is scheduled for 2 hours, so I'm planning to take a body break about an hour into the session. Just allow you guys perhaps to take a breather, perhaps get a glass of water for those, perhaps a cup of coffee as well. I know some with students that might be necessary. So yeah, if there's any problems that you do encounter, say for example, you can't hear me anymore, or my screen is not showing, then I'm going to ask you guys, please then unmute and tell me, listen, there's a problem, you can't see, or something is not happening. So in that regard, please then speak up. So yeah, once again, welcome. What are we going to do today? So we're going to start off with who am I? Your host, the voice speaking in the dark. There's at least a little photo of me, but I will turn on my camera and just show it to you guys that I'm a real person, not just a voice in the dark. And then we'll discuss what is CTFs. What does it actually entail? And I think then the more important part, how do one go about CTFs? Let's look at a few examples. And then perhaps why? Why do you want to do this? It might seem a bit random if you think, I know you guys are studying, you've got a lot of subjects, a lot of courses, exams, but why do you want to do this as well? And then also perhaps if you're really interested based on what you've seen, perhaps where can you find more of this? And then also we'll touch at the end specifically on the SANReN Cyber Security Challenge, when that will take part. So yes, I'm your host, Eloise Meyer. As I've promised, let me quickly, I have a little slide. I'm going to turn on my camera. Hopefully the network won't die. Let's see if I show up. I see a light. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm your host. I'm really looking forward to this session. This is the first time we've actually done something like this. So it might be a bit of trial and error. But I do hope that each and every one of you attending today, if you could just take away one thing, even if it's learning a new tool or a new concept, that's really the only thing that I would like. So if you can take away one thing, then I will be really proud of the session, and then it would have been worthwhile. So perhaps a bit more of myself, my background. So I'm a computer scientist. I studied at the University of Pretoria, did undergrad, honors, master's, PhD, all at UP. I started working at the CSO about 10 years ago. I worked in this defense and security group. But I moved over this year specifically to the SANReN Nikki's group, which I'll give a bit of background just now. I'm working there now as a senior network security specialist. And one of my key responsibilities is to host and coordinate the cybersecurity challenge. I do have a passion for cybersecurity, also quite passionate about mobile security and mobile application development. And I do have a love for digital forensics as well. Both my masters, well, not really my masters touch on mobile security, but my PhD focused quite a lot on digital forensics in the mobile space. So that's sort of my background. I'm a passionate CTF player. I was exposed to Capture the Flag events just out of university, realized I know nothing, especially about cybersecurity. I probably still don't know enough, but I try to upskill myself continuously. It's difficult to stay, how can I put it, ahead of all the things that's happening. But I am a passionate CTF player. I try to do 1 or 2 events each year. I will discuss some of them that I have done in the past. So doing this, being involved in this cybersecurity challenge and just giving you guys background on CTFs in general is a real passion for me. So I really do hope you can take something away today. So let me go. As I've mentioned, just a bit of background on where I'm coming from currently. So as I've mentioned, I'm part of SANReN. SANReN is the South African National Research Network, which forms part of NICIS, which is the National Integrated Cyber Infrastructure System. Now, NICIS, besides just SANReN, also consists of the RISA, which is your Data Intensive Research Initiative for South Africa. And then you also have the CHPC, which is the Center for High Performance Computing. So you have SANReN, which is focused on the networking. You have the RISA, which is focused on the data, and CHPC on the high performance computing. And together, these 3 groups actually allow and support large-scale research and science projects within South Africa. I think the most prominent one is perhaps the SKA, which is your square kilometer array project. It's those large telescopes in the Karoo for Afrikaans. So together or at least these 3 groups, or we as NICIS, really try to drive science projects and also to support universities as well. So this is just a bit of background on NICIS. There is more information available on our website as well, but this is not the focus for today. The focus for today is to see what is CTFs. So what is CTFs? CTF, for those who might not know, it actually stands for Capture the Flag. It's generally considered to be information security or cyber security, depending on which side you are of competition. Some might describe it as a war game for hackers. I put hackers there in quotation marks. It's a bit of a strong word, depending on your definition. We can also refer to white hat. So your white hat hackers, your ethical hackers. It's really there for them to either sort of learn new skills or hone their current skills, or perhaps just see where they are in terms of their current skill set. The objective specifically with Capture the Flag is to find that flag. Now, flag can have different meaning in this particular context, but that is your main objective. And usually there's a time limit to it as well. So it's how quickly and how effectively can you find this specific flag. Apologies, I just want to admit a few members waiting. There we go. They should come in. All right. So as I've mentioned, a flag can have different meanings in different contexts, but usually it would be hidden. It's somewhere either in the source code or hidden behind a certain vulnerability. It's not usually that obvious. It might be difficult to access. And also, when playing CTF events, it might be case sensitive. Now, for those of you who have participated perhaps in CTF events in the past, and perhaps just as a tip for future CTF events, it can be a struggle sometimes if you believe you have found the flag and you try to submit it and it's not working, and that can be to you being case sensitive. But just a little note there as well. Also, the format, it might be a message, like a collection of characters. It can also perhaps be like just a password or a specific file name. It is not always flag, a bracket, and then perhaps a string and another bracket. Believe me, I've actually tried this in certain CTF events where I'm so desperate to find the flag that I just go search for flag in either a file or a message or whatever is given to me. So it's not always that obvious. The individuals responsible for creating these competitions have actually noticed that that's a bit easy route to get flags. So they might have different formats to perhaps specify the flag, or as I say, it can just be a message or a file name or a password or just a name. So yes. So with your CTFs, I think it's important to remember that there's actually different styles to it. The most prominent one, and perhaps the more popular version, is the Jeopardy-styled CTF, but there's also an attack defense version as well. So sometimes you might come across certain information about CTFs, and some of them might explain a more Jeopardy-styled version, where others might touch more on attack defense. So I think it's just important to be able to distinguish between the two, since if you participate in the SANReN Cyber Security Challenge, if you make it to the finals, you will definitely encounter both of them. So what is the difference? So Jeopardy style is the more popular version of a CTF, where you have various challenges that are divided into categories. They have different points based on their difficulty level. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to the team that can solve the most challenges, that can collect the most points, will actually win that specific CTF event. So some of them, especially as they increase in difficulty, they will also have or provide certain hints. Usually that will count points, so you get a hint, but you might lose 5 points for that specific hint. But also, and I think this is an important tip, which I've learned along the way, when you do CTF, your Jeopardy style CTF, you usually will have perhaps a name to the challenge and a certain description. And either in the name or the description, there might already be clues. So if you do come across a specific challenge, it doesn't seem obvious at the time, perhaps just have a careful look at the title or the description. You might be able to actually get some clues to how to go about to solve that challenge. So just perhaps remember that. So with your Jeopardy-styled CTFs, as I've mentioned, they do have categories. So one of the more prominent categories is crypto or cryptography. Here, usually you would see or encounter perhaps collection of texts or strings that have been encoded or encrypted, and you would need to either try to find weaknesses to try and decode, or you need to be able to have a look at that specific encrypted code or text to sort of decipher what kind of algorithm was used to do the encryption. You will also encounter encodings, and here I can make mention specifically of base 64. That's quite important. Please remember, if you're not familiar with base 64, it's really helpful to know, sort of get a feel for it when you do CTFs. But there is also, when it comes to crypto challenges, there's just a few perhaps tools that I want to highlight that is really beneficial. I can mention CyberChef, which I will showcase a bit later on, Decode as well. These are tools that you can use to, if you have a certain encoded text, that you can try to decrypt using various encoding standards or encryption algorithms. There's also, I must admit, I'm not always sure how to pronounce, but Crypty, that's another one. And then a nice one that one of my colleagues recently shared with me, Box Intrigue. What is quite nice about this particular tool, not only can you decode, encode, but it also gives you a bit of an explanation about certain encryption algorithms or encoding standards. It's quite handy to keep close by. Then also reverse engineering, where you will often need to perhaps explore binary data. You might get a file that you will need to reverse engineer. Here, debuggers, disassemblers would be needed. I can't emphasize enough the use of a hex editor. When you do CTFs, that's always nice to keep close by. IDAPRO is another example that can assist when it comes to reverse engineering. Then web exploitation, very popular with your Jeopardy-style CTFs. Those common weaknesses in web application. With those weaknesses, we tend to refer to the OWASP top 10. Those are the kind of weaknesses that would usually be targeted. And here you will often also see SQL injection, directory traversal, command injection. But besides just your more advanced techniques, just being able to view the page source code, doing or utilizing the dev tools when you inspect that magical F12 button, Burp Suite, OWASP, ZAP, Dirbuster, those are some of the tools that I can perhaps make reference to. Then, not as common, but you do encounter them, perhaps not as common due to the sort of perhaps a bit more difficult, is your binary exploitations. We actually need to sort of find and exploit a vulnerability within a program. For me, I must admit, this is not my strongest suit when it comes to CTFs. When I see binary exploitation, I always think buffer overflow, perhaps even stack overflow. Those are the kind of challenges that you do encounter when you see binary exploitation. So for me, if you see it, just remember or think about buffer overflow specifically. Then in terms of forensics, forensics is a bit, how can I put it? It's a large category because you will often find with forensics perhaps a network packet captures. You might even find steganography. You might even find a capture of or image of a hard disk or perhaps a USB drive. So there's it's actually, I can build a whole training session just under forensics. But really what you're doing, or sort of the aim of your forensic challenges, is though searching for a needle in a haystack, is really looking for something between a lot of other things. But based on my past experience and what I've learned, a few tips that I can give here, and we'll see them a bit later on when we do the examples, is something like file signatures. Just being familiar with file signatures, those magical numbers at the start of a file. So if you take a known file format such as JPEG or PNG, and you open a file in a hex editor, you will see that those first few bytes are always the same. That is that unique file signatures, sort of describing the file format. So very handy to be aware that that is available, especially when you have perhaps a file that has a specific extension, but when you try to open it, it's not working. It's not opening in the application that you expect. Have a look at a file signature. It might be a different file. Another tool that's quite useful to recognize file signatures is binwalk, which you will find under Kali Linux. We'll have a look at it later on as well. When it comes to file system analysis, I really prefer SleuthKit's Autopsy. It's an open source tool. It works quite well with known file system formats, such as your NTFS and your extended file format that you will find with Linux. So should you do encounter perhaps the image that was taken of a USB drive that you will need to explore, I can really recommend Autopsy. Memory analysis, there's sort of a growing trend with this as well. Volatility is my recommendation. There might be other tools available, and this goes for all these kind of challenges. These are the, perhaps from my perspective, some of the most recommended or most used kind of tools to solve these challenges or to aid in these challenges. Volatility is also open source, quite easy to use. So if you do see a snapshot of memory, I can really recommend volatility. And then with steganography, for those not familiar with the term, it really comes down to the art of hiding data in images or audio. It's not something you might encounter, I won't say in real life. So it's really not really used to perhaps send messages, or if you do actual forensic analysis, this is not perhaps something you will encounter in real life. But for your CTFs, I can promise you, you will get the steganography challenge because it's fun to do, and there's quite a lot you can do with it as well. So just being aware of it is quite beneficial. There is different types of approaches you can use to hide data in images or audio. I'm not going to go into the technicalities of that. That's a whole lecture on its own. But there's luckily a few open source tools available that will allow you, if you say, for example, see an image, that will try to see if there's perhaps data hidden within, that will try to decode that data as well. Then also another handy tool, which is quite familiar, perhaps even popular, is the EXIF tool. So with your, especially with photographs or images that are taken, you will often have metadata associated with it. Often if you want to see the location, perhaps if it was a camera, the kind of camera used, this is the tool that you would want to make use of. And it's a nice place to perhaps hide a flag in that metadata. So just perhaps a tip there as well. Then in terms of network traffic analysis, this is also quite popular when it comes to CTFs. You will probably encounter a PCAP file. And for me, there is other tools, but I really am a fan of Wireshark. It's open source. It's GUI based, so it's easy to use. It's quite powerful. So perhaps in your arsenal of tools for CTFs, I would keep Wireshark also quite close. Another tool is Packet Total, which will do perhaps a bit more of a visualization in terms of the packets that were captured. Then also what we've seen recently with your Jeopardy style CTFs is also a sort of introduction of mobile security, specifically mobile applications that are used to hide certain flags. So being familiar with, especially with your Android application, since it's more open source, it's easy to utilize within CTFs. Being able to reverse engineer mobile applications is quite handy. So if you do CTFs and you encounter a mobile application or an Android application, usually it would be an APK file. My recommendation there is to use APK tool. It's quite a nice open source technology to reverse engineer and extract the files from that specific APK file. And from there, you can either try to decompile the the DEX files to jar, so it's a bit easier to read, but usually it might not be required if you can just decompile the APK file. You should have access to the necessary files, perhaps, to address or answer certain CTF questions. And then also grep. I can't recommend grep enough. It's a Linux command line utility to allow you to search for specific strings, especially with your Android applications, your APK files, that might ask you to look for a certain string or perhaps a certain IP address or certain value. There's a lot of files within an Android application, so if you can use grep to sort of streamline the process, it will make it a lot easier. So if you see Android APK, always remember APK tool. Then in terms of password cracking, I have encountered this with CTFs. Usually it would not be a too difficult password to crack. It's either something that you can easily brute force, or if you have a known dictionary list, such as your the popular word list ROCU, you might be able to decode or decrypt a password. So there is certain CTF challenges that do involve password cracking. It's not that you would require an advanced GPU now that you will need to spin up to run for several days to crack a password. So if you encounter password cracking, I think being aware of the ROCU word list, it's highly recommended. And also tools such as John the Ripper, Hashcat, and Hydra are quite popular tools when it comes to password cracking. And all three of these tools are available on your Kali Linux machine as well. And then finally, in terms of your more miscellaneous kind of challenges, you might encounter random puzzles, perhaps just requiring some basic logic or knowledge, or just being patient to solve. What I've seen with a recent CTF that I've participated in was the introduction of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, all of those kinds of technologies into the challenge. And it's not, if you look at perhaps Bitcoin, it doesn't really fall under any of these categories, but it is a popular trend currently. And I think that was the reason why it was introduced. So it might be the case that you come to a CTF challenge and there might be something random because it is something that's happening at the time. I do know, but this is now quite a few years ago. I think it might be about, I'm guessing about 8 years ago with Heartbleed. For those who might recall it, with the SSL vulnerabilities, that was a popular sort of theme for challenges at that stage. So if there's a hot topic or a hot trending topic, you might encounter challenges regarding that topic as well. So that was your Jeopardy style CTF. So there you have categories. It's basically puzzles that you have to solve. Now, with attack defense, the setup is a bit different. So here in a team environment, what will happen is each team will be given either a machine or a specific network consisting of various machines to protect. So they will have an initial round where they will need to have a look at the given machine or network to see if there's any vulnerabilities and perhaps how they can go about to patch and protect that specific machine or network environment. So you might be given half an hour to an hour, depending on the difficulty, perhaps even longer, and you need to set up your defenses. Then in terms of the next round, it's basically free game. So there the environment is opened up and now teams can start attacking other teams. So they can try and see perhaps there was a specific vulnerability not patched that they can exploit to gain access to their machines. And usually how this is monitored is you would try to place a specific flag on the machine that you have attacked to showcase, yes, you've gained access to this machine. So this is perhaps a bit more hands-on. I don't want to say real world related, but this is actually, if one thinks of perhaps in terms of penetration testing, those kind of skill set, that is where it comes in, specifically with your attack defense. For those, some of you might know, the biggest attack defense CTF ongoing currently is the one hosted by DEF CON. Now, DEF CON is an information and cybersecurity conference, hacking conference that's usually hosted in Las Vegas. It was just hosted now, I think they concluded on Sunday, and they're known for the biggest, largest attack defense CTF. It's at the scale that you have to qualify. It's not open to just anyone to compete. And I've been fortunate enough to attend DEF CON twice. I actually walked around because it's usually open to the guests where these teams participate, and you can walk in and just sort of have a look. How are these guys participating? How are they going about? And it's insane. They're just sitting and typing away, if I can put it like that. So it's actually, I think the people there is probably your best of your best when it comes to hacking and penetration testing. So as I've mentioned with your SANReN Cyber Security Challenge, these are both these events. So you will have your Jeopardy style CTF, but we will also be doing an attack defense. And I think it's nice to have a balance of both events there, to give you exposure to not just solving puzzles, but perhaps also more the penetration testing side of it. So how do we actually go about CTFs? I've given you guys some tips. I've mentioned a few tools now, but perhaps it would be good just to get a taste of different CTF challenges. So what I'm going to do is I'm just checking the time. I see it's about 20 to 5. I think I'm going to do perhaps 3 or 4 of these challenges, and then we can perhaps take a 5-minute break. Just a break for me as well to drink a bit of water. A lot of speaking going on. And I've seen there's quite a few questions. Perhaps I can respond to them in the 5 minutes so long. So let's dive a bit into a few of the CTF challenges. So let's start off with our Jeopardy CTF examples. So our first CTF that we encounter here, a secret message. So this is your crypto version or category. This would be considered an easy level of difficulty. And basically what they're asking you is, what is the secret message? And there's a lot of different styled characters going on. So for some of you, this might perhaps be already straightforward what this might be, what kind of encryption or encoding is used here. For others, it might not be so clear. Usually when I encounter something like this, what I would do is perhaps look at the spacing. So if you look at there's spaces, there's commas, there's full stop marks. So this is perhaps already, you can see there's words and sentences. The structure haven't really changed. So seeing that, my first thinking is it is probably a substitution cipher. So the letters were swapped out for other letters, basically. When I think substitution cipher, I always think Caesar cipher. And there is a sort of special case of Caesar's cipher, and that is your rotation 13 or rot 13. So that would be perhaps my guess. So what I would do in such a scenario, I've mentioned Cyber Chef. So I'm just going to quickly change or move away from the presentation. I just want to open Cyber Chef. So this is Cyber Chef. From my perspective, highly recommend it. It's quite a nice technology to use for CTFs. What's nice is you can actually build like a recipe. So if you have multiple layers to something, multiple encodings or encryptions, you can actually build a recipe and then just run the solution one time. So very nice, and they've got a very extensive, let's call it, library of encryption, encoding algorithms already available. So for example, we can see there's ROT13. So what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to grab our just the encoded message, our secret message. So here it is. I'm just quickly going to copy it over. So we can paste it here. So we have our input here, our output. At this stage, it is still the same because we haven't applied any, for the lack of a better word here, recipe. So we haven't tried to decode it in any way. So what I'm going to do is, as I suspect, I'm going to take ROT13. We're going to apply it here, and we can see our output has changed. So there we can see now the message is the Caesar cipher is one of the simplest encryption algorithms. And it just gives further an explanation of the Caesar cipher. In my experience, I've encountered at least a form of substitution ciphers almost in every CTF I've played in. ROT13 very popular, but sometimes just to change it up, they might change the amount. So it might not be the standard 13, might be 17, 19. And what is nice is you can actually play around here and it will change, as you can see in the output. So if you get something, encoded message, and it doesn't change with ROT13, my advice would be is add it here and just start from 1 till you get to 25. So very handy, very handy. All right. So let's go back to our presentation. So our next challenge, so many layers. It's another crypto, and this one is a medium level. So but what we receive here basically is a zip file, and they just tell us find the flag in the zip file. So let's see if we open our zip file. So here we have our specific zip file. So what I'm going to do in this scenario is I'm going to take this specific CTF challenge and use Kali to solve this one specifically. The reason for that is there are certain tools in Kali that I want to demonstrate. But please know that when you do CTFs, you can just use Windows as well. You can perhaps just rely on Kali or Linux if that is your preference. I like to have sometimes a mixture of both, but I must admit I usually end up using Kali when doing these challenges. So what I've done is I'm going to quickly open my Kali machine. So Kali is it's an open source, freely available. They refer to it as a tool for offensive security. So it's basically based a Debian version with some tools and technologies pre-installed. So if you install Kali, the username and password is usually Kali, so we can log in. And perhaps just for interest's sake, what is nice, as I've mentioned, there's already quite a large collection of tools available on Kali. So let's quickly have a look at your password attacks. You guys would know I've mentioned John the Ripper, so there it is. There's Hashcat as well. With your web application analysis, I've touched on Burp Suite. It's already pre-installed within Kali. Then also reverse engineering, there is some tools already available. For example, there is APK tool for your Android applications. So quite a large or an extensive collection of tools pre-installed. These are just some of the tools with perhaps a GUI interface. Some of them are just command line based, which might not be so easily visible, but we will demonstrate a few of them as well. So let me quickly open our challenge. So if you recall, we have our crypto challenge. We received a zip file, and our task was to find a flag in our zip file. So usually when I receive a file or a document, I'm always skeptical if it's really a zip file. Perhaps it's the extension was changed. Perhaps it's even an executable, or perhaps there's even something embedded within that specific file format. So for me, usually what I would do is, let's just quickly gonna open a terminal. If I do ls, we can see we have our flag.zip, and I'm just gonna run the command file flag.zip, and this will basically just give me an idea of the kind of file that this is. We expect a zip, and as we can see with the response, this is a zip archive. If you're even more perhaps skeptical, what you can also do is open a hex editor. So you can type hex editor flag.zip, and I'm quickly going to open this. And if you guys recall, I talked about the file signatures or the magical numbers. So if we look at our first few bytes here, we can see there is a PK, that is the 504B. And what is interesting, if we go to, there's a wiki page, a Wikipedia page available, which is basically a collection of file signatures. And I just want to show you guys, if I go find, define PK. And here we can see, so for the specific file signature of PK, you expect to see 504B, and that is a zip file format. It's interesting that you will see this file format also for your APK files, for your docx kind of files, jar. And this is why it's really beneficial to know about file signatures. It really helps when you have, especially when you encounter sort of an unknown or a strange file format, to get an idea of what this file actually is. So I think one can say with certainty this is a zip file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this, and I'm just going to unzip and see what we actually get. Okay, we can see that there was a text document in cipher.txt. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say cat cipher. So the cat command will actually just display the contents of this specific file. And we open it, we can see, okay, there is a lot of, I want to say, gibberish kind of text, a lot of capital A's. But for me, scrolling through this specific file, looking, what I'm seeing now is, my guess is, this is probably a file that is base64 encoded. And the reason for that is you will see a mixture of upper lowercase characters, and there's also a few numbers in between. So for me, based on my experience, I've encountered quite a lot of base64 in CTF, so I am familiar with the look and feel of it. That would be my first guess. It might also be I've actually guessed base64 once and I was actually wrong. It was a different base format, but this is my guess. Another giveaway, especially with base64, is your padding character. That is your equal sign at the end. If you see equal signs at the end and sort of similar to this kind of text, I would also guess base 64. So what I'm going to do, I just want to confirm that it is indeed. I'm just going to copy this text. So it's quite a lot. Here we go. I'm just going to copy this selection. And then I'm going to use CyberChef again. So the similar tool that we used in our previous challenge. I'm going to open it up. I already have it here. So here, once again, we can just paste our input. We haven't applied any recipe, so our output is similar. But my guess is this is probably base 64, so I'm going to apply from base 64, and we can see, yes, there's a lot of change. And once again, why file signatures are so important, I can see at the start there is a .alf in this specific file. Now, your .alfs, and for those who perhaps have done CTFs in the past, that is your executable linkable file format. It's usually executable files that you will encounter in a Linux Unix environment. So if you see ALF as the file signature or the magical numbers at the top, expect it to be an executable file. So since this is the executable file, let's save it as a file and see if we run it, what actually happens. So I'm going to save this output. I'm just going to save it as the ex file. And you can say, okay. And then you can say save file. So if I'm correct, I think it's in my downloads folder. Yes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a terminal here. I'm just going to do ls.al. So I'm just going to list all the files in this directory. And I'm also going to list their permissions as well. So I can see, okay, the executable file that I've just downloaded from CyberChef, it is it's available, and we can see there it's got read and write permissions for the user, and then just read permissions for the group and everybody else. So that might be a problem if we try to execute it. I also just want to confirm if it is indeed an executable file, an ALF file. So we'll use the file command again. And we can see, yes, okay, so it is executable. But you will see now, if I try to run the file, we get permission denied. The reason for that is it doesn't have the right permissions to actually execute a file. So usually when you might do CTFs, you might encounter an executable that doesn't yet have the right permissions to actually run. So that's quite easily solvable. You can just use chmod +x. So this will give it the executable right to the specific file. So if we run that and we do ls.al again, we can now see the little X has been added. So we have now both the user, the group, and all other users now have execution rights. And if we run this file again, just to make it quicker, we can see there is our flag. So I think the real idea behind this challenge specifically is to sort of understand that you know, with your when something is perhaps encoded, the ability to once you have decoded to build that file, to be able to execute that file. It might not always be an executable, might even be an image or perhaps even other file format. And what I try to demonstrate with all of these steps is perhaps just utilities that you can make use of if you encounter something similar, such as the file command to make sure what kind of file type it actually is. Also the understanding of file permissions and how you can assign certain permissions to certain files. So just a bit of background then. Once again, I've utilized CyberChef just to show you guys the value of that tool as well.